Well, thank you, Seth, for being here. You've written a second book that I read with great interest. It talks about elites, about business, about relation business-state and development. You called it Betrayed. Why did you choose that title?
I chose that title because, for me, one of the fundamental drivers of why countries work or don't work is the behavior of elites. Are they thinking that their role is to develop the nation, the state? Do they feel a responsibility to their fellow countrymen and women? Do they feel empathy for people who are poor? Do they feel they're connected to other ethnic, religious groups? And in most of the developing world, specifically the fragile states, they do not. And the net result is exclusive state building or exclusive behavior. And in that sense, they are betraying their people. And that is why I chose the title. I think there's many reasons why they do that. And as you know from my book, I discuss things like social relationships and lack of social cohesion. I talk about ideas that might have impacted what they believe, and most importantly, incentives. There's often an incentive to be exclusive and not inclusive, so I can't blame them completely, but nevertheless, I think they are betraying their people.
Your book, in my view, is optimistic. You are optimistic that, yes, we can understand the poor if we try a little harder, and other players, external actors, let's say donors, could also, if they did a better effort at it. Is that optimism justified?
Well, my job as a writer is, of course, to be optimist, to think that we can actually understand the problems of underdevelopment and do something about it. Having said that, I'm a big believer that to make change possible, and we are on the outside, we need to focus more on an ecosystem. Often in development, we are looking for the answer. I do not believe, one, that there is a simple answer, and two, that we on the outside can do very much to find it. Therefore, I'm optimistic to the extent that I believe whether I'm an individual elite, a potential leader in a country, a leader in economic sphere, in business, or civil society, or politics, or government, all these people can play a role in promoting change. But you have to be optimistic. You have to be able to leverage the resources that you have. And the things that are possible in the short term relate to this ecosystem. What we can do on many, many, many levels, and some of them can be done externally, of course. I don't mean to say we can't affect change, but we only can affect change indirectly by making the ecosystem different. And that means, to be more practical, we could be investing in a law school. When was the last time a donor tried to build a law school? We always talk about the rule of law, and then we try to make government act differently. Do we ever produce lawyers that actually could be playing a role? Lawyers and legal think tanks that can analyze what law actually exists in the country, and then producing other institutions that would help as an ecosystem to improve the chance that there will be hybrid legal institutions that will come forth. If we don't do these things in the ecosystem and we just directly try to work on the government, very small chance of change. So I'm optimistic because I'm looking at development in a different way, and I'm optimistic we can affect change if we look at it this way, and it's very different in how we look at it now.
You also invite, for example, donors, external players, your elites in developing countries, to look more carefully at the business community, at the private sector. Could you perhaps illustrate why that we should be paying more attention to the business community?
There's a couple of reasons. First, if we want to go from poor, if our goal is to reduce poverty, to go from poor to middle class, poor to wealthy, it cannot be done without businesses. It's something that's so simple, yet is so forgotten. Wealth production is driven by companies, sometimes multinationals, more often, especially in most parts of the world. There's always the Singapore exception, but mostly wealth production is going to be driven by companies locally that form, and then they grow and they become medium-sized, and eventually some will become bigger companies. And if we want to, the first big reason is, if we want to really end poverty, we have to have an empowered business class that can produce products and produce services and then make them higher end over time, slowly more and more sophisticated, and hire more and more people. And that is the process by which an economy will develop. But so that's one thing, and we can never must forget that. And to the extent that we focus on only vaccinating children and only building schools and not business, we're very limited in our vision for the people that we are seeking to help. But I would say a second reason, if we want to change the incentives, these countries have what I would say a vicious cycle of bad incentives leading to bad behavior or unproductive behavior that feeds back into bad incentives. And it's a vicious cycle that's very hard to break. One of the ways, and my book is all about practical ways that we can try to change these dynamics in lots of practical steps. One very important way to change this is that you want to have local, sometimes could be multinational, but mainly a business sector that will have an incentive to make change happen in the rule of law, in the way the government works, the property laws. There are bad businesses and there are good businesses. And to the extent that there's no rule of law and there's an elite that has a vested interest in having bad businesses work with them to control the country, which has happened, crony capitalism has happened all over the developing world. We remember it from Southeast Asia in the 90s. We have it in Tunisia. We have it in Egypt. We have it in lots of sub-Saharan Africa. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about working with companies that develop enough of a scale and have enough of an incentive that over time a critical mass of them could work with the government, and a partnership. In essence, you have, like most of East Asia, a partnership between the politicians and the business people to develop their countries is what drove East Asian modernization. And to the extent that we exclude the business sector and just focus on the politicians and the poor, which is what we often do, we're missing a very important component of wealth creation and a possible way to change incentives.
What is a key message of your book that you would hate to see get lost in translation or in the exposure of your book to the audience?
I am at heart a big, what I would call a structuralist or an institutionalist or a big picture macro type of person. And when I look at why countries work or don't work, I'm trying very hard to get at different issues. You've raised a few of them during your questions now. There's others, things like what ideas influence people, where's the distribution of power in the government, social cohesion, and so on and so forth. If I'm looking at a tree, I'm not so interested in the branches. There could be a couple of branches that are okay, but if the roots of the tree are not healthy and thriving, that tree is not going to live very long. So when I look at underdevelopment, I really want to get at these big structural issues that are in many ways, they're very political, but I would also call them pre-political. They're pre-formal institutions before we get to democracy and elections. There's social dynamics, institutional dynamics, other things going on in that country, and the formal institutions are on top of that. And to the extent that we do not focus on what's before them, underneath it, and seek to change, again, the structural issues by somehow slowly working on the ecosystem. Again, the ecosystem, everything we do on top is destined to either fail or have a very limited return on our effort. I would say that would be one of the key messages that I would hate for people not to take away from my book.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.